Hi everyone, this is Nicole from Impact DataSource on the line. I also have my colleague Paul Scheuren with us and Amanda Regan from E Smith Realty Partners, and we are so happy that you can make us, you could make it today to sit in on this webinar with us. We've got some good things planned for you. So just so you know a little bit more about who we are, Impact DataSource is an economic and fiscal impact consultancy firm based in Austin, Texas. And we've got Paul Scheuren, the economist here, and then myself, I'm the business development manager. And then we also have Amanda Regan from E Smith Realty Partners on the line. She is the vice president of site selection and research. And Paul, will you tell us a little bit more about what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicole. Thanks for that intro. Today, as the title of the webinar suggests, we're going to be talking a lot about data, a little bit about the IEDC data document that came out, but kind of at a big picture, the way that we're going to split this webinar up is kind of as you can think about a data on the attraction side, so how economic developers use data for attraction versus then as after we hear a little bit from Amanda with site selection and so on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about data for operations of an economic development organization, kind of share some things that we do and some ways that we look at data. But really the impetus for the whole thing is the new document that IEDC's research partners put out. It's this new standard in achieving data excellence in economic development. It goes, beyond just the site selection criteria and talks about data overall in economic development. But in today's agenda, we want to get some site selection, site location perspective on data in economic development in 2016, kind of what that looks like. Talk a little bit about how that's evolving over time as data is becoming more and more crucial and available. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm going to wrap up and talk a little bit about this concept of economic development organization's performance report. And it's kind of, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Jerry and I will talk about this one as the what have you done for me lately report, where economic developers are kind of constantly up against that, where they need to show what they're up to, what they've done, and how they're actually helping develop the community. So just kind of getting into this first piece about attraction data and kind of these site selection data standards that IEDC was talking about. And they were originally out in 2002, I think was the last time they were updated. And now they're coming back to look at data in a little bit wider sense. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking, in 2016, is it even relevant? Should we even bother with this stuff? Why should an economic developer go out and try to look at some of this data if it's just what site selectors can find this information and probably know even more about your community than you do. So I kind of starting from that concept, I wanted to just maybe turn it over to you, Amanda, and tell us a little bit how site selectors get and use data. And I think this can give an insight maybe to some of our economic developers who are listening in. So let me, I'm going to hand this screen sharing over to you, Amanda, and then you can, oh, hold on. I'm not doing it right. I'm changing the presenter. Sorry, there you go. You can share your screen and kind of walk through what it is you do on a given project.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yep, I see your browser.
Got it. Okay. Maybe I can hide no. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to move some stuff around. Okay. So as a site selector at E Smith Realty, we have access to a lot of data sources because we purchase them. I will say not all site selectors approach doing a site search like this the same way. I really pride myself on being very methodical in making decisions based on data and research. And so with that perspective, we make sure we subscribe to lots of different types of occupational databases like MZ, for example, or Esri, to get our demographic information and do spatial analysis. We also work closely with a lot of economic development organizations and make sure we foster and build those relationships so that if there's any local data that you can't get from some kind of subscription and we want to include it, that we can get that and include that information in there. And then other types of data we like to include are the real estate piece of it as well. And so pulling from all these different sources and then being able to analyze it all together is is essentially what we're doing, and it's all data. It's all driven by data and the different information that you can get. Even I like to say that even qualitative data is included, right? Just stories on the ground. What's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't matter either way. Just the relationships that you build and the information you can get just from talking to people in the community. I also consider that data, and it's something that you can quantify and put into a model. And so I was asked to do an example project, and I won't go through everything we went over, but as a way to show how data has driven this process, essentially what it does is it helps markets more so than it does select markets, right? You start off with the criteria given by the client. Sometimes they know exactly what they want because they know it works, and then you're able to figure out what makeup of variables match best what they're trying to achieve, or they really loosely know what they want, and it's up to you to try to figure out what are the best metrics for success. This particular client was Slack. They're a technology company, and that does instant messaging. I'm not sure if any of you guys use that in your office or not, but what they needed was a facility for their tech support. They wanted to grow up to 300 people, and they wanted to live in an area or have their office in an area where they can really become part of the community, implement their Slack culture. It's very Silicon Valley, very young, very hip. Essentially they're just kind of listing off all these ways that they felt about their area instead of giving me hard numbers. We need to be at this wage, we need to do this, and so I had to take all of those different things that they were looking for and find ways to quantify it and have it driven by data. And so you can see right here, here's the macro level analysis. Oh, and they needed to be on the East Coast. So essentially, let's see if I can move these. Essentially, based on what they wanted, there were very few markets that met the requirement on the East Coast, and about 14. So taking those metrics we were looking at, and I'll go over what those were in detail here in a second, we were able to provide them with 14 markets, plus a couple in Canada. We treated that one differently since you can't get the exact same data in Canada as you can in the U.S. And so for this project, for this piece of the project, here are the top 14 markets. Ann Arbor came in at number 1 based on what they wanted. And so what goes into evaluating this and getting these market grades are hundreds and hundreds of different variables that are kind of then rolled into easy to understand metrics that we then weight and evaluate for each market relative to the other markets you're looking at. And so I'll just go over a couple of these examples. I'm not going to continue to go through the rest of this, but one thing that's really important to consider for measuring labor sustainability is the aging labor force. That's a huge concern, especially to a company like this who really wanted to hire younger individuals. And so looking at something like the ratio of the younger half of the labor force to the older half of the labor force was a good indicator for that market. How is it aging and progressing? The occupations, we were looking at how many times are they posting for a unique job. The idea behind that is if they're posting a lot for an occupation or a unique job, then it's more difficult to hire in that area versus not posting as many times.
And Amanda, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Sure.
this one, so this is for a specific company, kind of a technology company. Would the way that you weight these things, like I think I see like sustainable labor 30% and labor cost 25%, would that be different based on the attributes of a different business or the different direction that you get from a different business?
Exactly. So everything's weighted. I probably should have gone a little bit more into that, but everything's weighted based on a combination of our knowledge of what would be successful for the client and what they're actually looking for and what they desire. And we have it set up to where they can go in and they have a more interactive piece where they can go in and change these weights if, internally they decide, actually diversity is not as important to us. We're more concerned about cost. So we can change these weights and, assign different values to the metrics. But what essentially goes into measuring each of these types of categories is ultimately decided by myself or a team member, and what we have pulled from speaking with the client, and then of course our knowledge about what is successful.
Okay, great. And they told you in the beginning the East Coast aspect of it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that was kind of the first filter, as you mentioned, kind of, eliminating places rather than just like selecting. It's more of kind of narrowing it down.
Exactly. It's just essentially a filtering process. It's like, all right, here are all the markets that meet this requirement. Now what's our next one? Okay, now we can eliminate all of these because they don't meet this wage criteria or whatever it is you're looking for.
Very cool. Now, have you just to stretch this a little bit more on are most of the projects that you're working on office or high-tech type of projects where some of these things like you're mentioning livability and labor are kind of some of the bigger aspects of it? What about location in terms of like utilities or infrastructure in terms of access to markets and those sorts of things that you often hear with site location? Is that one obviously didn't come into play here, I guess, right?
Correct. That type of stuff is a little more important on the industrial side. So honestly, it really depends on the client and what's essentially important to them. I really wanted to use this as an example because I feel like a lot of those are more obvious ones, and I don't know. I think that more and more companies are getting very concerned about the labor, and here I work with a lot of very well-known industrial brokers that are they're excellent at their job, and now they're getting to a point where all of their clients are starting to ask for the labor analysis piece of it as well. They're like, yeah, you're going to be able to save me X amount of dollars, and real estate costs are big over here, but can I even hire anyone? Especially in the e-commerce and distribution center space, because they have to ramp up for the the holiday season, and that is a huge struggle for a lot of them. And so labor seems to be more on top of mind for on the industrial side. And then I know it's always been that way for office, but I think, like you were mentioning earlier, with more and better access to the data, that's becoming more and more common that they're looking for labor first and real estate second, or at least simultaneously.
That's great. That's really interesting. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt and get on that, so just go.
Oh, no, not at all. I won't spend too much more time talking about some of these metrics, but of course we benchmark on existing. they didn't have any wage they wanted to pay per se, so we just benchmark against their existing location to identify the areas where they can achieve the most savings. And then, you know, couple that with, you know, how wages are projected to grow within the market. You have diversity. They wanted to make sure they were going to be in an area that is, I get more liberal in their acceptance of, you know, the LGBT community, and be an area that's fairly diverse because they wanted to hire those populations. And so we were able to, you know, pull variables such as the Municipal Equality Index and a diversity index, both of which, you know, well, the MEI tells you about, it's an index given to the market from the Human Rights Campaign, based on, you know, if the LGBT community in that market are, you know, if they feel like they're accepted, or if there are actual laws and policies in place that help protect them. And then with race and ethnicity diversity, you know, the higher the index, the more diverse it is. And so those are just a couple of the metrics used in this particular project, but really it can be anything from, you know, the actual utility rates to, you know, how some people feel about the area. It's really just custom tailored to what it is the client's looking for to be able to pick a market that actually fits them best, and not is, you know, is not just, you know, the lowest cost or best real estate option. You know, you really there are so many different things that can go into measuring, you know, what it is the client's actually looking for. And so how do I hand the screen back over to you?
Oh, I think I can take it back. Let's see here.
Okay, or unless you guys wanted to see anything else from this study.
Yeah, well, let me ask you some questions, I guess, and I don't know if we need to see the screen or not. It sounded like, I guess, as I'm listening to this, you know, that was Tableau that you were using, and it looked like you were pulling in a lot of different data sources. So it wasn't just, you know, you went one place and they have it all. It's, you really got to pull it from multiple places.
Mm-hmm.
I'll scroll through here, but what can you tell me about kind of those next steps? These are some of the slides that we were looking at, but as the and this was something I want to talk about in a moment, but as the process worked its way through, and you kind of narrowed it down, how did you reach out? What was that first point of contact like? Were you speaking to someone at the regional level, at the metro level, or did you already zoom in and find a site and that kind of thing?
Well, with this project, and this is fairly kind of the same for the majority of my other projects. It really just depends. But you know, we like to reach out either at the state or regional level. It also depends on, you know, where we're looking at in the particular market. And so, you know, for some places it's the, you know, the region's more responsive, other places the state's more responsive. It just depends on, you know,
how
where we're looking.
Development goes in that state, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Exactly. And so for getting down to a list of markets, so the first short list, so to speak, was probably around 20 to 30 markets. That's about average. It's a healthy, good set. And then from there, if it's real estate driven, like, you know, they need to move into a space pretty quickly, then that's about the time we go ahead and eliminate the markets where there's not available real estate. And so that's either some kind of CoStar search coupled with reaching out to the communities and saying, hey, do you have anything that's available for these pieces? And so that'll allow the markets that don't even have anything, you know, available to be able to move into to fall off.
Okay.
We also, around this time, will reach out to the community as well to get information about the local businesses. That is one type of data source that is it's not very well documented in terms of what you can subscribe to and how businesses are classified, and it's very dirty. It's very, in terms of, I guess in data terms, it's very dirty, not very neat and perfectly organized. And so that's when we reach out to the communities and say, hey, you know, we would like to know, like for example, in this project, we wanted to know who are all the major tech employers and how many employees, like any new announcements, you know, coming down the pipeline that we need to know about, or you know, how many employees are they expecting to hire and projected job growth, and then also where they are within the market, because that'll allow us to take that data and then see if there's anything within the market or anywhere within the market where our client can be successful based on where their potential competitors would be. Mm-hmm. And so that's key as well. You know, knowing. Go ahead.
Oh, so how did they view, a company like Slack, let's say, or if it maybe to put it in terms, if people aren't familiar with Slack, but think about maybe Google, where obviously they're kind of a big national, multinational company. They're not really competing with, you know, businesses where they are locally. I mean, they have a local office, let's say, but they're not necessarily on the product necessarily competing with someone down the block. Because their markets are basically the entire world. How do they? You had mentioned kind of this clustering idea where they want to know who the other high-tech companies are in the area. How do they view that? They view that as like, oh, there's a good community, there's a good culture, there's going to be a lot of high-tech workers in the area. Is that how they're looking at it, or are they looking at it from some sort of competitive standpoint?
So it's a little bit of both, right? Understanding. I guess I didn't finish my sentence when I was talking about asking about the tech employees. Also, part of that was understanding where the major competitors who are hiring the similar types of occupations, right? So like your more high-end call centers or tech support centers, and so being able to look at those together, it can tell you if there's like a certain degree to which you want that agglomeration economies, because especially in tech, there's that mentality and that lifestyle that kind of surrounds it, that the client would be comfortable with being in that area because they know that those employers would be successful, and also it just kind of drives the economy in that direction and would continue to support those occupations in the future. But on the other hand, there's the competitive component of it, and you don't want to be positioned in the market to where you'd be across the street from your largest competitor or the Googles, so that you're not essentially just training their employees. You have to have a good balance, and so that's why when we get that larger short list, we start to reach out to the communities so we can supplement our data with their more local, knowledge on the ground data, and then put those two together. And so, I think the reason I had this map up here, I can probably maybe send you guys a better version of it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. This map, it shows things like the bike share program and the trails and the new developments and the breweries, just so we could see if they're, the client wanted to be in somewhere that was walkable. And so by doing this for each of the markets that I was originally, that larger list, we were able to remove some of the markets that didn't really have that kind of clustering of those types of amenities that they were wanting, if that makes any sense. At least around areas where there wasn't too much competition.
Okay. Was there, I guess just maybe kind of in wrapping up this specific example, but I have a couple other questions for you.
Of course.
Is this one settled? I mean, we're talking about the actual company name.
Yes, it was settled and announced, and I chose to do the U.S. locations, for example, because I love the breadth of data that we have access to, and it speaks really well to what we do, but they actually ended up choosing Toronto um, because they just really liked the community and loved what they had to offer.
And they had remind me, I think they were founded in Canada too, though, right? So they had a little bit of a Canadian.
Yeah, there were some Canadian ties, and they felt fairly comfortable with making that move up there.
Well, this has been really really interesting to look at some of this data and see what, kind of how you are viewing, some of these communities as you're pulling it together. Was there anything that you found surprising as you worked through this? That was maybe something that the something that the company was concerned about that was a surprise, or maybe it was just kind of run-of-the-mill tech location?
Actually, some of the other communities that I was evaluating, that maybe if I would have, gone off of what I perceive about that community, those communities weren't, didn't show up as well as they're probably not even on this list, but let me see if I can remember one. I think there was like a Tennessee market or two, like Knoxville's not.
Okay.
Anyway, I can't remember honestly right now, but there were a couple of communities that I thought would have been on this short list and maybe even towards the top originally, had I not gone through and done the analysis or the data. And there's a couple of markets in this top 14 that I thought would have easily been higher, like like Durham, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like if, just thinking off the top of your head, you're like, oh, easy, Durham area. You think tech, you think college kids, you thinking research triangle. So, being able to then take this and measuring it and, weighting everything based on what the client's actually looking for, really starts to tell the stories and takes away any kind of bias that a site selector has.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let me, so I do have a couple other questions. Let me just jump back to my slides here. This was a figure that was in the IEDC document, the data document, and this was, they surveyed site location consultants, and they asked kind of what are the most important factors. You can see, the blue part's critical, and then somewhat important is the green. And as they rank those, you can see the available buildings and sites as number one, infrastructure and utilities as number two, and that kind of goes maybe to what we were talking about a little bit with it depends on the type of business. Does this list here that you're looking at, the ranking, does that surprise you, or that's kind of what you think, or do you see or observe something different on a day-to-day?
I say it just depends on, I think it really depends on the site selectors that were part of the survey. If they do a lot of industrial or like a call center type work, this is fairly spot on. If it's more along the lines of office or the the type of project we just looked at, then it would be much different. And so
yeah, it seems like
honestly, it just depends. I think I am a little bit surprised about labor market. From what I do every day, it seems like that would be a little more green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely mentioned that buildings and sites were kind of an important piece once you got down to your area, but you were almost filtering on the reverse of this list, thinking more about quality of life, demographics, and higher, those sorts of things seem to be pretty important in this case. So I guess if I'm looking at this as an economic developer, I guess I would just think about, your community is what it is, so to speak, in some terms, and so maybe accentuating the positive and kind of at that strategic level and focus on your strengths, than trying to be guided by some of these things that you're looking at here.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I would say, to kind of add to what you just said, if your community's trying to attract the Slacks of the world, then yeah, focus on the quality of life and the labor market and the education, but if something, that you're, really good at and trying to focus on developing and fostering, or, more the industrial or the call center piece of it, then, then you need to make sure you have things like available buildings and infrastructure and utilities. So it just really depends on what is, what is the focus for your community, and what are your strengths?
Yeah, that's great. So let's see. I have a couple other. I think I asked you one of these about when you're reaching out to an economic development. I think the answer essentially is it depends on the state and how economic development is set up, and maybe even how significant a project is or something like that. So I guess the answer to this one isn't really always regional first or anything like that. It really just depends.
Yeah.
Is there, I'm asking what is the most important data that a local economic development organization can provide, but is there anything that is helpful? And maybe, again, that one depends on maybe what's missing in your big data sets. Is there something you can think of there?
Yeah, I think the example I used earlier with the local businesses and, their employment, like employment numbers and, what they're doing in order to attract employees, I think that's some of the most critical bit of information. I do find it a little surprising when I talk to a community who doesn't know what businesses they have in their community and where they're located. I kind of understand the number of employees and whatnot, but at least at the bare minimum, who's here and where are they located. Those are very critical pieces of information that we need to know.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess maybe I'm not sure how often or if you used an RFP in this process, but if you're in those kinds of cases, is there anything that you can think of that generally gets left out that EDOs don't include in that maybe you're asking for, and it's leaving a hole, and is that a negative effect on things, or you just go back and ask for it, or they get crossed off the list, or what's the?
I'm typically very specific in what I ask for personally, and so if I say I very specifically need the address of this facility and the number of employees, or average wage rate, or whatever it is I'm asking for, I typically will get it if they have it. Mm-hmm. And so I never really have anything that's left out, and if I do, I just respond back and say, hey, can they get, you forgot to include this, and then they get it back to me if they have it.
Cool. And then this was a statistic in there that was, according to IEDC, that 16% of the organizations use the data standards and post them on their website. I guess, number one, does this surprise you? I guess it's not very, very large percent, but also maybe, you're out on ED websites, I'm sure, but are you even stopping to look at this? Because you've probably already reviewed it, right? You've probably already looked at that type of data that you need in your system, right?
Correct. That is definitely not something I look at, but that's not to say that other site selectors who aren't doing the data analytics piece of this don't. So I can't really speak to that, but I think more and more for the site selection process, there's people like me involved, and that'll continue to be true moving forward. So take that how you will, I guess.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I thought was really interesting. It was kind of you were trying to get at this idea of the labor market, but you were using kind of this metric about job posting intensity, and so I thought that was kind of an interesting way to get at to get some answers to some of the data that you want, but in kind of a little bit of a roundabout way, not so as direct as just going to the Census Bureau and downloading the job file or whatever it is. It seems to be probably a more real-time source of data, and so some of those things that you have access to are even better than what they could provide. This is one, and maybe we don't need to go through all these items, but this was, and maybe we talked about some of these too, but they listed EDOs kind of thought these items were important, but that they didn't usually collect them. And I think you mentioned about specifically about how many jobs there were in the community, but that they were kind of missing at least sometimes. Well, who are your employers and that sort of thing, and having some of that maybe the BRE type of the business retention and expansion type of data going out and kind of interacting with the businesses in the community. Is there anything there on that list that is something that you really would like to get from EDOs that you think actually would be important, or this is not all that valuable necessarily?
Let me take a look at it real quick. I mean, a lot of these things I already have data on myself, and so I actually will look at a lot of these types of variables. So they are valuable. So for those site selectors who don't have the data, so to speak, these would be very valuable for them if they know to look at these types of things and they know how to measure success. I think improvement in a region's competitive position in the global economy, I'm not sure if that's saying exactly what I'm about to think it's saying, but I think understanding what a community's strengths are and that they've done the research and the analysis and then have it forefront and that information ready for you, saying, hey, here's what we're focused on, here's what we're doing. That's good information to have, because if then there happens to be some kind of fit, it'll it's worth keeping on your short list kind of thing. And then also just being able to know that the community is making an effort to better their labor force or their workforce and better their community in general, that things are being done and it's not just misguided or trying to take a shot, stab in the dark at what they're supposed to do. I think really speaks volumes as well, and that's good data to have because it tells you about the type of community that it is.
Yeah, so that was just kind of thinking about that. This was another, just kind of to tie this together, because it's starting to sound kind of like what I was expecting as I started reading into the IEDC data document and thinking, right, like I said, 2016, why do we need to bother, why should an ED organization even bother looking at this? Site location consultants already know all this stuff better than you do. They've got all these databases. And so one of the things that they mentioned in the piece was that kind of the uses of what they're doing with their data is this idea of benchmarking against neighbors, or like just looking at and reviewing this stuff. And so to me, this is kind of goes back to the idea of the importance of knowing your community as an economic developer. And so the whole data exercise isn't just to check a box and say IEDC told me to do this, so I did it. It's really kind of to better understand your community, understand what the community looks like to a data-driven site selector, and be prepared to tell a little bit of a narrative that will explain maybe the history of the community and express, the vision for the future. Gives you a chance to address those perceived weaknesses and highlight emerging strengths as you're looking at it as those site selectors will. So I think that was kind of the big takeaway for me as I looked at the IEDC data document. I kind of had 3 questions, and I addressed these in a blog post that I put out last week. So why are we even talking about ED data standards? Isn't everything out there for us? And these are takeaways kind of from the data document of these. Some of the critical data isn't necessarily available, and so if it's something that you can pull together for site selectors or businesses looking for that information, that's an important role that you can do. But also, as I said, the economic development organizations need to know how the data portrays the community. They need to see it as they are being seen. And then, so is this data about site selection and attraction? Is that all this document talks about? And actually, no. The data document from IEDC went into how economic development uses data across the board. So it's kind of this idea of attraction and operation. And then one of the concerns I had as I was getting into it was like, is this just going to be really too nerdy for most people? And knowing that a lot of economic developers aren't huge data nerds. I mean, obviously the data is a huge part of what they do, but there's not those folks that sit in cubicles staring at spreadsheets all day necessarily. And so one takeaway that I had was that this wasn't really too nerdy. I thought it was a good mix of information that's digestible, it's accessible, but it did give you enough detail to kind of get going and dig in more if you wanted to. This is the link that I have for the blog that I did that kind of wrote up this in a little bit more detail. But what I wanted to do, so Amanda, thank you again for joining us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about operations data in economic development, kind of more of what Impact DataSource does on a day-to-day basis. But for folks that are listening in, if they have questions for Amanda, feel free to type those in as we're going through, as I'm going to talk a little bit, and then we'll come back and take any questions that might come up in that time frame. If you just go ahead and type them into the GoToWebinar channel, and we'll get back to answering those. But I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about, like I say, this operations data. And so this is kind of, again, our day-to-day work. We focus on data for operations of the Economic Development Agency. So in a typical case, we're looking at an individual project, and the new business. We want to determine the impact that it will have on the community in terms of these three main aspects, and you can see them kind of interlinked here. So we start with the economic impact, we have the fiscal impact, and then an incentive analysis. So in the economic impacts, we're most commonly economic impact measure that we think about is jobs, so those direct and the spin-off jobs, so the indirect and induced jobs. The second piece, the fiscal impacts, fiscal is just kind of a fancy word, makes you feel real smart when you say it, but really we're just talking about the new taxes to be collected, and typically we also want to estimate any new public safety, infrastructure, or education costs that are coming on as a result of the project as well. And then that final piece, as we pull everything together, is the incentive analysis. And so this is where things can kind of get crazy, and you kind of choose your own adventure as you put this analysis together. You might be putting a deal together where there's tax abatement. You might have the incentive analysis just needs to take into account that reduction of the tax revenues. And so we're getting into the real fine detail here in the incentive analysis. You may have a performance-based incentive or a grant tied to job creation or investment, and that incentive might look at it as an investment and calculate an ROI. Nicole and I just did a video on ROI yesterday about economic development ROI, and so we can put a link to that somewhere if someone wants to see a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of that incentive analysis and calculating ROI. But as we talk about economic development operations, and as Jerry and I, my partner Jerry Walker and I, think about what economic developers are doing on a day-to-day basis, one thing is that they'll produce a report kind of on a one project at a time. So they're looking at a new business that's coming in, and so, okay, this is the impact of that business. We're calculating our net benefits. We see our job creation and our other economic impacts, and we can analyze those incentives. So that's something that we do quite regularly. This is a screenshot from one of our kind of individual reports. And this type of report's really helpful to show your elected or appointed officials that this deal makes sense and it will benefit the community. But now, as I say, another type of report that we do for many of our economic development clients are these ED performance reports. And so this is when we can roll up several of these individual reports or these individual projects, let's say, and put them into what we call kind of an economic development organization performance report. And that's to say that maybe over the last year or couple years, we're going to add up all of the projects that economic development organization worked on. We're going to summarize those kind of in aggregate, and then we're going to be able to compare the community's investment in economic development to the benefits that are generated from that group of aggregate projects. And so this is, as I was mentioning earlier, this EDO performance report. The idea here is it's kind of the "what have you done for me lately" report to kind of remind the board or remind the city council what your organization is doing, what they're responsible for, who they've helped, and how that has affected the community. So if we look at just some examples, this is a report that I pulled together it's kind of a modified version of a report that I pulled together. It's not the actual results. It's slightly modified protect some things. But what we did was we said, look, these are the projects that the ED organization supported in 2010. It was one project with 8 direct jobs. In 2011, it was a handful of projects, maybe 3 or 4, and it was a total of 130 jobs. And so forth. By 2015, they had a couple projects, and that was 385 direct jobs. So we went ahead and we calculated what the total impact was as a result of, again, these. It was maybe 30 projects or more. But we're totaling it up, and we can see that the direct employment impact over this 5-year period, or 6-year period, excuse me, is about just over 1,000 new jobs. And so that, as we calculate some spin-off activity, we can see what that looks like. We can see the earnings. We even translated into kind of this snowball effect of the economic output. So this is the impact of the cumulative impact of the ED organization over that time period. And as I mentioned before, that's the economic impact aspect. Now we get into the fiscal impact. These are the benefits and the costs that are being generated as a result of all this activity. And we can see that the city at the top line there is getting net benefits as we project out of about $4 million as we evaluate each of these projects over a little bit of a horizon. And then this is where we get into our ROI for the Economic Development Performance Report. We take a look at what the EDC did. They invested $6.8 million, and we can compare that back to all the benefits that they created. So we can see this table that we're looking at, and it's labeled Table 20. We've got this investment in economic development. That's our $6.8 million, community investment in economic development. And for that, the ED organization has created 1,800 permanent jobs. They've got economic output of over $3 billion that's being generated over this time period. Workers' earnings, taxable sales, net benefits for the city, and net benefits for other taxing districts, we can see are listed there. And so we can boil it down to, in this, where we have this bullet list, we can say that for every $1 of investment that the EDC, that the community made, the EDC returned, you can see $500 in economic output, over $100 in workers' earnings. We can even see, in terms of some of these tax revenues, about across all taxing districts, it was about more than $1 in local net tax revenue. So this is just one of those ways that you can really show what it is your ED organization is doing for the community. We can also boil it down in terms of jobs, direct jobs created with every $6,500 of investment, or if we include some of those direct, so the indirect and induced, it's more like $3,700 for each job created. And so that's some of the kind of nuts and bolts operations data that I wanted to talk about a little bit, just to show one of these kind of end of the year or every couple years reports where you can roll up those individual projects and really kind of compare it on a return on investment on the community's economic development investments. That's going to wrap it up for me. I've got our contact information here. I'm going to make the slides available. We'll send out an email with the video as well, so we'll have the slides and the video available. I think, Amanda, we just did such a great job talking through all these things. We didn't get any questions. We might wait a moment if somebody wants to type a question in. But maybe I just interrupted you enough times with all my questions. But I think if anyone has questions for us, you can feel free to reach out to any of us here. And Amanda, again, I'll thank you so much for joining us. I think this has been really good. I think it was really helpful to me, but also hopefully to all of our economic developers that could join us to see a little bit behind the curtain of what site selection consultants are looking at and how they approach things.
Of course, very happy to help. And again, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to shoot me an email.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda. I think that's going to wrap us up. Thanks.
Thank you.